is very self-conscious and very the left and Berkeley and places like that are very self-conscious and self-critical of their horrific history of slavery, right? They're a little less about the Native Americans, and Australians hardly talk about the Aborigines. Actually, from what I've seen, there's no more horrific tale than what the Australians did to the Aborigines, okay, which is the original native population in Australia, okay? But again, I want to keep this, I'm talking to you about the Muslim world and the Muslim psyche and how these things have affected, right? So there's a question that how did colonialism happen, right? And there are different answers to that, no doubt, right? One answer that the colonial powers themselves would give at that time is that, well, we are bringing enlightenment and civilization to these barbaric people. And this is not something that one of them said once. This is something that numerous of them said. The reality is that it had much more economic motives. And actually, India is one of the best documented cases of that, because you start with the British East India Company, and then lo and behold, you move to an outright, full-fledged invasion and occupation and territorial takeover, and it becomes the diamond or the jewel and the Queen's crown or empire or whatever it was, right? Okay? And then you still have today. And so before I continue this, to give you an example of post-colonialism, is this strange slave mentality that is still fond of that. So we're part of the British Commonwealth. Allah, do you know what does British Commonwealth mean? Commonwealth means that these are the countries that we invaded and occupied and horrifically talk about human rights violations. We did human rights violations, the likes of which Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have never even documented in the last 50 years. You're all the ones we did that to, and now you will be proud that you're part of our Commonwealth. And we'll give you a couple of scholarships so you can come study in our country to make up for it. That's what it's called, being a Commonwealth nation. Allahu Akbar Kabira, it's ajeeb. Izzat hi nahi, ghairat hi nahi hai logon mein. That's the post-colonial mentality. Go back to colonialism. So I told you that some of them claimed, and some of it was religious, by the way. This is much less. Majority is economic. Some of them tried to give this claim that they were bringing enlightenment civilization to barbaric lands. Then there was missionaries who took advantage of this, and you had a lot of Christian missionaries then traveling in these lands. And all of Christianity in Africa is due to missionary activity under horrific colonial times. All of Philippines being Catholic today is due to Catholic missionary activity during an oppressive, was it Portuguese, if I'm correct, occupation of Philippines, right? Okay? Spanish or Portuguese, whoever it was who were controlling the Philippines, right? Even Portugal, Portugal is like a no-name country today. Portugal was also involved. Mozambique, so they definitely had. Anyway, so there's a whole history of colonialism. What I want to show you is what enabled, so these are the motives of colonialism, mostly economic, partly this idea, it's a racist idea that the white man has to bring civilization to the non-white barbarians, and much lesser religious missionaries, okay? That was the motive. For every crime, you'll remember there's a motive and there's a weapon, all right? Because you can't carry out the crime just with the motive. You must have the weapon and method to do that crime. The weapon and method of the crime was the military technology, was the superior military technology. Because that is another history that many of these colonies resisted. Whether they were Muslim colonies resisting, that's called jihad fi sabilillah, right? Whether they were even non-Muslims or African, there were people who fought. But, there may have been individual battles they won, but by and large, every place, maybe other than Afghanistan, right? Every place, they were defeated, right? Why? Now, they would say, because our motive was true. No, because your method was sound. Because you had superior military technology. Not because you were truly superior white race and we are inferior. That's not why you pulled it off. Not because Christianity is better than Islam in any sense. That's a separate discussion. You pulled it off for one reason, because you had superior military technology. Okay? Now, Post-colonial, so I'm not doing modernism now, I'm doing colonialism for you, okay? Post-colonial Muslim mentality, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and others like him, buying into the first thing, that yes, they were superior and enlightened and we're behind, right? Buying into that myth, right? And this is something actually that, the very leftist Hindu, they're probably agnostic, atheist, Indian, cultural Hindus, but they write against this a lot. In fact, some of the greatest literature against the post-colonial mentality comes out from India today, right? They're against this notion that, you were right and you were more advanced than us, all right? But a question arises, the reason they thought this is, why were Muslims so weak that non-Muslims were able to occupy us? So I want to explain to you again, it's one simple answer, military technology. And I want to explain to you why. So this, in current terms, this is called indiscriminate warfare. Islam prohibits indiscriminate warfare. Islam actually prohibits, essentially. Now it may allow you to develop those weapons for self-defense when you know there are people out there who are willing to use indiscriminate warfare tactics against you. That's a secondary thing. But at the primary level, Islam prohibits indiscriminate warfare, means any type of weapon that targets civilians, innocents, women, children, non-combatants. That's why Islam doesn't invent, originally, cannon and daisy buster, or whatever it's called, bombs, right? It will then may try to invent that, or whatever, copy that, or steal that technology, or whatever, as an act of self-defense, but Islam would never originally sanction the invention of such military technology. So the reason why the West, at that time, we're talking 19th century Europe, right, achieved higher military technology than the Muslim world is because they decided to invent a kind of technology, which is the mass, weapons of mass destruction, if you will. Okay, but that's a 20th century term, but weapons of moderately mass destruction that Islam does not allow and is not used historically initially. All right? That's it. It's that simple. And because they had that type of weaponry and we initially didn't, they were able to take over. The Africans didn't have it, no doubt, because they were just, leading simple agrarian lives. That's fine. It's fine. It's not. So there's another thing, by the way, of modernism, which is the Industrial Revolution. Right? Let me explain that to you as well. The Industrial Revolution, because that's another motive, the economic motive behind colonialism. If you read about the Industrial Revolution in Europe, so E.P. Thompson has written a book, The Making of the English Working Class, and he documents how the British industrialists squeezed their laborers. Look, Marx didn't come out of nowhere. Marx was a true, genuine human being, and he saw this tortuous human rights violation level, oppression of labor, whereas the factory workers and the miners were working 10, 12, 14, 16 hours on some occasion, and they were being squeezed and being given just pennies, so that the factory owners and this new capitalist, you think capitalism came out of Adam Smith's brain at some philosophy? Capitalism has an extremely violent history in terms of oppression of labor. But that's why Marxism exists, to correct that, to identify that, and their identification of that is correct, right? We may not believe in the extreme solution of communism that make all property common and public, but capitalism has extremely violent, oppressive history, right? Now what happened was these European countries were competing with one another, this, what economists love to talk about, competition, right? They were competing with one another, squeezing their own people, oppressing their own people. And they wanted more, so they went to Africa to squeeze them. Do you understand? They squeezed their own first. It's not like we're whites and we don't know ours. No, they squeezed there as much as they could first, and then they came and they kept squeezing their own, and then they started squeezing the others. This is the history of quote unquote modernism. This is the economic history of colonialism. This is the economic history of the birth of the modern European nation's capitalist state, right? But the post-colonial mentality doesn't understand this. So the post-colonial mentality says that, we were weak and we should have been strong and we weren't so developed, we weren't so civilized and we weren't so advanced. So then, the way modernism then suggests to a person that you can abandon these core Islamic ethical, spiritual, moral values, and you should pursue the same thing. You should pursue the same thing. And therefore you will see in many Muslim countries the same capitalist model of oppression of the lower class. Just look in Pakistan. The rich get richer and the poor stay poor. If maybe they get poorer, I don't know. The same model being replicated. You can have a prime minister who says, I'm going to make social welfare. No, I mean, if somebody's in Norway and Sweden, they have they have less than half the population of Karachi. I mean, these are unique small cases. This isn't symbolic of the West. These are not representative case studies. These are outliers, right? This is not the way the West operates. This is not the way China operates, right? So this is the notion of modernism, right? This is the notion of modernism. And one simple thing for you to understand is actually the core teachings of Islam are universal. They're not classical or medieval or modern exclusively. It's for all times. It has nothing to do with whether in a classical period, early medieval, late medieval, early modern, modern, postmodern, post-postmodern, beyond postmodern, 20th century, 21st century, 22nd century. It's not pegged to what age and time you live in, all right? No doubt, Muslims should study science and do scientific research and pursue scientific and technological advancement. No doubt, unfortunately now, Muslims will have to waste time, money, and resources chasing such weapons so that they can have a defensive capability to defend themselves against other nations that may not currently be hostile but could at any time turn hostile, who have those offensive weapons capabilities. That's an unfortunate reality. Otherwise, Islam wouldn't want you to do that, right? But even Western international relations teaches any nation, realist theory teaches that you must have a defensive capability that matches the offensive weapons capability of the other, which is impossible now. You can't even match the West, but this is what arms races and all these things are about, right? And the amount of money that is spent in Pakistan and the US and Russia and China on their own defense budget and then arms manufacturing and exports, it's horrific. It's a complete misguidance in humanity, right? It's a fitna, and that, like I told, the military technology thing, that is an exclusively modernist phenomenon. That wasn't there in medieval times, nowhere near this scale, all right? The last thing is reformism, okay? Reformism. So now I'm doing this internally to the Muslims now, okay? So the modernist Muslim is duped in thinking that, we just have to become more modernized without fully understanding the history and the violent history of modernity itself. Okay? Reformism. So reformism is actually a word. Reform comes from reformulate. Okay? Reformulate. So you only reformulate something when the original formula is flawed. Right? That's the only reason to reformulate anything. Okay? And if the original formula is perfect, then you will never need to reformulate. So let's go back and look at this slide. Do you see the word perfection? In fact, I should have put the word perfection with God as well. Right? Because I talked to you about that. Divine perfection, perfect being theology in the first day. Perfection of God, perfection of revelation, perfection of prophethood. Means the original formula is? So therefore you will never need to reformulate. You may need to continually assess how to apply that perfection to contemporary context, circumstances, situations. No doubt there will be constant living dynamic interpretation, application, right, of Islamic morals, principles, theology, etc. in different settings, but you're not going to tweak with the original formula. That you're not going to do, right? This is the fundamental problem with reformism, right? Reformism suggests that you have to, so let me do this for you now. I'm going to show you, so I have a couple of slides to show this to you, because it's going to be specific to Islam, all right? How does the reformist want, and on what basis will they suggest that you have to reformulate the core beliefs, right? So here, it's not just from Muslims. I'm going to show you this from actually across the board, okay? All right. Just to give you a little historical thing, a lot of the reformist movement also is a result of colonialism. In pre-colonial Muslim history, you will not really find this kind of something that you would call reformism, right? You find it in the colonial period. By the way, I should also explain to you, in the colonial period, not every place was a colony. For example, the Ottoman Empire lasted until World War I. But in the 19th century, we were living in the colonial age. Therefore, the Ottoman Empire also engaged in reformist, they're called the Tanzimat reforms. They also engaged in reformist and modernist activity, trying to Europeanize many of their things, because they were witnessing what was going on in the world, and they had post-colonial, during colonialism, they kind of had a post-colonial mentality that we also have to Europeanize and modernize and reform, otherwise we may become the next British or French or Spanish or Portuguese or Italian, you know. I mean, can you imagine? I don't know if any of you know about the current economic situation of Italy, right? It's a complete shambles, right? But Italy also, in Libya, and Italy also did horrific things. And what the French did in Algeria, Allahu Akbar Kabira. Horrific things, all right? Horrific things. Okay. So reformism came from, so the modernist Muslim felt we need to modernize in all of that English and science and technology and all of that. The reformist Muslim took a different tack, said, no, there's a problem with our religion. The modernist actually doesn't really say that, although maybe many modernists are reformists as well, right? Reformist says, no, we need to go back and see why was our religious scholarship not strong enough to stop colonialism? Why was our religion not immune to colonialism? Some of them were also revivalists. Some of them took it in a different sense, that maybe because we're not so practicing. So we have to revive the practice of Islam, because maybe we were weak in our practice or lazy in our practice. So God put these colonial foreigners, non-Muslim powers over us. So that's another movement, which is called revivalism. Revivalists. All right. Okay, so let's look at some of the challenges to core beliefs. So some of it isn't going to come from the reformists, because reformists obviously believe in God, right? So just to give you an example, that atheism obviously challenges the core belief of the existence and oneness of God. Modernism and humanism often challenges the attributes and acts of God. So one aspect of humanism also, which I did for you yesterday in a very sweet way, sincere way, but they feel that there's no such thing as hellfire, and no human being will go to hell, right? Because they believe so much in the intrinsic good of human beings, right? And they perhaps have become a bit blind, or maybe blind is a bit desensitized to the evil in human beings. All right? Okay. But that's already done. So it's in terms of revelation and prophethood that the reformist is going to do their work. So reformist Muslim actually there's no challenge to the core belief about God. The reformist Muslim, and whatever you want to call the original classical Islam Muslim, right? In terms of their belief about God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, existence, oneness, attributes, acts, it's the same. The reformist Muslim, and you see it's the same words I will use, they talk about context and application. Context and application. So the most prominent one who speaks in Urdu in Pakistan, his name is Javed Ghamdi. All right? So now you understand he is a reformist Muslim. All right? So now, like I mentioned to you yesterday, one are his comments and statements on the state and politics. You know, we may even agree with some of the things he says there. What I'm talking about now is more of his written books and what he writes about Quran and Sunnah. And that is a certain reformist ideology about the Quran and Sunnah. All right? And there's a particular language and terminology that him and other reformists use, and that I want to open that up for you a little bit. Okay? The first is this issue of context. And this did come up in one of the earlier days, context. So he will very much stress, becoming reformists, stress that, and so the way they sort of, undertake this reformist exercise or enterprise is that the Quran, the verses of Quran al-Kareem that were revealed were revealed in a particular historical context. That is true, but their application and interpretation is also, in some cases, particular to that context. That is not always true. Right? So that the verses were revealed in a particular context, that's fine. That's a field known as Asbab al-Nuzul in Tafsir. Right? And we don't know that, by the way, about every verse. We do not actually know about every verse or passage or set of verses of Quran, on what occasion they were revealed and what was going on in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, in the life of the Muslim community. We don't even know that about every verse. Right? We do know that about many, but not every. The ones we do know that about, right, we do accept that they were revealed in that context. And obviously the Prophet ﷺ, he applied that revelation in that context. But we say, and I did this for you yesterday, day before, that every verse of Quran al-Kareem has absolute, universal, perfect, complete, everlasting validity. And there will be a sense in which there will be some general principles, general teachings that emerge from that verse that will still have application in any and every context after the context of the revelation. This is something that happened even in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because if the Quran is confined to its context, then fine, the verse would be revealed, let's say in year 3 of the seerah, and the Prophet would have applied it, and then they would never have talked about that verse again for the rest of the life. No. Throughout the entire lifetime of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all of the Quran continued to be applied, not only applied once at that context in which it was revealed. Then immediately again, in the time of Sahaba Kiram, radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, after the Prophet passed away, that same one and only Qur'anul Kareem revelation was applied, and all of that is post-prophetic history. That is after the original context of revelation. So just like that was the case in the earliest times, that continues till today. Right? So, for example, literally, some of these reformers literally write it word for word. They actually say that all of the Quran is no longer applicable today. They actually say that. They say it in such sarih, such clear and explicit words. All of the Quran is no longer applicable today. So let's step back. There is a philosophy in our deen about the difference between Quran and Sunnah. No doubt there are some things. Not everything in Hadith is like this. Some things in Hadith are universal, and you will find some things in Hadith that were specific to the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that may not, so that's a subject of scholarly interpretation and juristic interpretation, to what extent that may or may not be applicable today. But it's an understanding that if Allah Ta'ala chose to reveal something to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Quran, as in the form of Quran, yani kalamullah, in divine speech, as opposed to Allah Ta'ala inspiring the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and doing wahi, revealing to him in the form of sunnah, which is not divine speech necessarily, but is a type of divine meaning and guidance, it's because that what Allah Ta'ala revealed to him in Quran is that which is necessarily meant to be universal. And that's why it's part of Quran al-Kareem. That's the whole underpinning philosophy of Quran. Quran again being the azali, abadi, pre-eternal, eternal kalam, divine speech, attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright? So the very fact that something is in Quran means necessarily that it is universal. The vast majority of hadith are also universal. There will be a few hadith which definitely can be an issue of scholarly interpretation. So, for example, I did an example of that with you yesterday, which was apostasy. Right? Do you remember? And I said that is an issue because that comes in hadith. Alright? That's an issue that people can discuss, and then they may end up on differences of opinion, but the discussion will only take place if there's an acceptance that there may be different applications of that in different contexts. But when it comes to Quran al-Kareem, it is a universal. So let me give you one of the basic examples, and then we'll sort of continue this after Dhuhr, inshallah. So today, we'll continue after Dhuhr, then I'll take your Q&A on today's stuff, and then I'm going to do your leftover questions, inshallah, from the first 2 days. All right? So, there are many examples of this, but to take an example from the Quran is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you should cut the hand of a thief. Now, what we can do is talk about what constitutes theft. What's the minimum requirement of the value of that item? What was the situation the person was thieving, right? And so there are incidents of that in the time of Sayyidina Umar, that he may not have applied the punishment to a particular act of theft because he didn't think it constituted theft. But there was no understanding in his mind that this is not the punishment for theft, right? What is theft? That can be discussed. But once theft is established, what is the punishment for theft? That is universal. So this is a perfect example. So the modern sensibility views cutting the hand as a very brutal act, right? Because the modern criminal justice system is basically focused on either fines or imprisonment. That's pretty much all that's 99%, community service. There can be there's three types of things that are done now. Either you sentence a person to some jail time, you fine them, right? Or you make them do some type of community service, rehabilitation, education. 99% falls in these three things, right? Why? Now go back to their John Stuart Mill. They view this as a harm, right? But, you could also argue, and there are people who are critiques of the prison system who argue that putting someone in jail is also a type of harm, right? So again, what is harm and what is not is subjective. I can tell you, many Western educated Muslims, or even many Pakistani Muslims who have gone through English medium education, also kind of find the prospect of cutting the hand off a little bit hard to absorb. Okay, I'll even tell you, me, for many years, I also found it difficult, Not that I questioned it, but like if somebody asked me, okay, would you cut his hand? I said, no, you can do it, but I won't be able to do it. I won't be able to look at it, right? Because we have this thing, right? Okay. This is an area where so there's a very important aspect of our deen, which is called submission, right? So if you go back to the first day, remember when I was explaining, I said this is the core thing. Premise number 1, Allah Ta'ala in His existence and oneness and attributes and acts is exactly how He has revealed Himself to be in Quran. This is the core belief. Allah Ta'ala in His existence, oneness, attributes and acts is exactly as how He has revealed Himself to be in Quran. Number 2, Allah Ta'ala in Quran has said, He is Al-Hakim, He is Ahkam al-Hakimin. He is the being of absolute perfect wisdom. Number 3, in His perfect wisdom, in His universally applicable revelation, He has decreed that the punishment of theft, properly defined and understood, is that the thief's hand should be cut off. Step number 4, I as a human being, maybe due to my secular, liberal, Western education background, find it a little bit uncomfortable cutting somebody's hand off. Fact number 5, my idea and thinking, compared to the infinitely perfect and infinite wisdom and infinite knowledge of the divine, one and only God, Allah, that I believe in, I'm nothing in comparison. So conclusion, the thief's hand will be cut off. Do you understand? The reformist has all these same steps, except that last one. Reformist says that I, in my own understanding, or I, in my even genuine, sincere wish to make Islam more palatable to people who find this discomfort, I will try to reformulate this understanding of Quran, that the hand of a thief should be cut off, so that after reformulating it, the punishment for theft will no longer be that the hand is cut off, but the punishment for theft will be whatever prison sentence the American courts give. This is the difference between reformist Muslim and whatever you want to call originalist or classical Muslim. All right? So we allow, in that step, we acknowledge that the human being may have some discomfort. The human being may not, understand, because the human being is in a different context, right? The human being has been raised, this human being, me, has been raised in a context where punishment is only fine, sentencing, or community service. So that is what then is called a norm, right? And all of the empirical reality and everything I've observed and heard is according to this norm, right? So I acknowledge the discomfort. I'm openly telling you, right? But it's nothing, because I know my religion has taught me another teaching, which is also submission, not just the wisdom of Allah. So divine wisdom, perfect wisdom, and for the human, perfect submission and subordination. So if I accept those two things, I know now how to process my discomfort. And I won't process my discomfort in a way that I reformulate the Quran and Islam so that the punishment changes. I will now, in light of the core belief of divine wisdom and of human submission and subordination, I will reform myself. I will reformulate my discomfort. I won't reformulate Islam. I will reform and reformulate my discomfort and swallow that and suppress that and maybe even ultimately eliminate that and rise above that and accept that the punishment for theft will be the cutting off of the hand. All right? Okay, so we stop over here so that people can have time to go to the masjid, make wudu, pray the sunnahs, inshallah, and then we'll resume after the dhuhr and lunch break, inshallah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika astaghfirullah wa atubu